Hi everybody, this is Hannah and I'm doing an interview with Liz Butcher and we're going to be talking about her book, LeRoux Manor. I've got a picture of it here and I'll be able to show you in a moment. Liz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, Liz here from Brisbane, Australia, and I'm so thrilled to be here with Hannah.
Brilliant. As promised, here is the cover. I hope that's flipped it around. Oh gosh, LeRoux Manor. So this novel is basically what I would describe a paranormal thriller. Is that accurate, Liz?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Brilliant. So I read it. I finished it a couple of weeks ago, and I just have a few questions about it. Really,
Sure.
my first question is, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Have you always been a writer?
Off and on. It's only really been sort of the past 5 or 6 years that I've sort of made or tried to make a bit of a career out of it. Used to love writing when I was a child and everything like that, but yeah, sort of really only the past 6 years that I've steadily built up a portfolio and released my first novel and everything. So yeah, I think people that are writers always have been to some extent. It's just when you actually decide to bite the bullet and go for it.
I can imagine that's really, really tough because I know a lot of authors that I've spoken to suffer from imposter syndrome, where they feel
Yeah.
they're not good enough, or
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to get the work out there. And I know for myself with short stories, I find it quite embarrassing. I don't know if you have felt the same.
Oh, absolutely. And even like with the short stories I sort of released early on, I look back now and cringe and think, oh, they're so terrible. But I was so proud of them, obviously, at the time. But, you do improve and you grow as a writer. And that's imposter syndrome is definitely a huge issue. Like my first book took literally years for me to write purely because of that reason. But I think once you get the first one out of the way and it's not quite so horribly received as you anticipate, I think then you get the confidence to sort of keep going from there.
Yeah, I think with regards to experience, the first one may always be a little bit jittery, if you like. But once you start getting into the flow of things, as with anything, practice makes perfect. And even then, it may not always be perfect as you would like it, even though the reader may think it's perfect. And I always find that quite interesting as a reader. When I read books, I'm like, this is amazing. I love this book. And the author turns around and says, really? Because yes, give yourself the credit. Because obviously you've worked really hard on it, and I know it can be super tough because it's the literary world, getting published and everything like that, even with self-publishing, can be very dog eat dog, and it's very competitive.
Exactly. And I think also the genre you're writing can play a huge role in that as well. I find sort of writing horror, dark fantasy tends to be a little bit more niche and I guess less broadly accepted to some of the other genres. So you're kind of already starting the race on a back foot. But it's all just part of the challenge. So, and I like a challenge. It keeps it interesting anyway.
Definitely, I must concur with that one. My second question, as you have written quite a few horror novels, what is it about the horror genre that interests you so much? Have you had an interest in other genres?
Not really. I mean, aside from LeRoux Manor, most of my work does sort of cross over with other genres. LeRoux Manor is the first one I've written that I would say is primarily a horror novel. But I don't know, everything I write tends to lean towards the dark, even if I don't intend it to. But I think that's just me. Like ever since I was a little girl, I've always been fascinated with the paranormal and things that were sort of a little dark and creepy. So that's just when I started writing seriously, that was just where I sort of naturally fell into it without consciously saying, oh, I'm going to be a horror writer. It's just I just started writing and that's where I kind of fell. amongst the genres. So yeah, it's just where I'm most comfortable, I think.
That sounds awesome. I find that interesting that you've kind of you've slotted, been, or not slotted, but you're naturally aligned to horror writing. I think some authors have to go through this journey sometimes to find the genre that they're most comfortable in, but it seems like you've just straight away. Is that because you've done a few collaborations in the past, like collection of short stories?
I don't think so, because even with the short stories that I had published in anthologies starting out, the themes or the genres didn't necessarily have to be horror. You were just given sort of the topic and then you sort of wrote within that. But my story still ended up being horror. So I guess it's just, where I naturally, just write from.
That's very cool. I think horror is quite hard to write in the sense that you've got to be able to build the tension up and you've got to maintain it for a certain amount of time and keep the reader interested. Whereas I find fantasy another interesting topic because you don't have to keep the same amount of tension or shock or revulsion almost. But it goes along a very different path. I just find that comparison very interesting. Sorry, I'm waffling on now.
No, not at all. And it's a good point to make. And it was something that I was very conscious of, especially writing LeRoux Manor, being the first one that was straight horror, because being the author of a horror novel, you know what's coming and you know it's around the corner. And so you do worry that it's not going to translate as scary or it's not going to have that tension. And I was, always I was on my editor's back the entire time. And it's just like, please just tell me, I don't want it to be cheesy. I don't want it to be predictable. Like I need to know these things now because I want to make sure that it's scary and I want to make sure that I can take the reader by surprise and it's got that suspense. And there was one particular part that I was really just wanting to nail, and I was worried that it would be a bit predictable or a little bit cheesy. And she replied back to me with, I had to put it down and walk away and come back to it later. She said,
That's
to scare
good.
the crap out of me. And I'm like, yes, that's what I was going for. So, but it is because the whole thing about horror that makes it scary is that you don't know what's around the corner and you don't know what's coming. So as the author of that element's taken from you. And it can be really hard and all challenging to make sure that it all comes across the way you want it to in your head.
To be honest, in regards to the main character, I don't know how Camille, after she knew there was a hole in her cupboard, I just thought to myself, if that was me, I would be staying in that room knowing that there was sorry, spoiler alert people, but knowing that there's a tunnel behind your bedroom wall that enters into your bedroom, and it's like, no, it's like all in the horror movies. Don't go off on your own. Don't do that. You're going to die. And I kind of felt that. I was just like, why is she still in this room? I was really annoyed, but in a good way, because it got me feeling that sort of tension and thinking, when's that creepy lady going to appear? And, and I thought actually, just to let you know, that the McAllister lady was creepy lady. Mina, adult Mina, isn't it? Mena, is it? How do you say the name? Mena. Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought she was her, but like in ghost form or something. So, but yeah, it was really interesting because your brain does overtime when you're reading horror.
Yeah.
Trying to, I think it must be like a safety mechanism to try and know what's coming, so then you're not too scared.
That's right, you're preparing yourself for what's potentially coming. But I love that you likened it to the horror movies where you're like, don't run upstairs, like everybody knows you don't do it, but the characters always do it.
Yeah.
And I love that that's translated in LeRoux Manor because, from the safe position of, your couch or your bedroom, wherever you're reading the book, you do have that logic that's saying, why are you in this room? Like, are you insane? But then you've got Camille who's just so intrigued, and just her desire for answers kind of overrules the logic that we feel from the
Yeah.
safety of the other side of the book. So I guess that's where the flip side is, and probably with characters in horror movies too, their desire to find what's going on just shuts down their logic. And that's when you see them, you know, running upstairs, or, you know, staying in a room with a big gaping hole behind the wardrobe. Like, it doesn't make sense to you as a reader, but to the character, it's where they need to be.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really good. And it definitely got me thinking, if this was me, because I'm a big baby, if it were me, I just wouldn't. My next question was regarding LeRoux Manor. Was the manor itself inspired by a similar building you visited or researched?
No, I wish it was. Research, yes. I've always had a fascination for really old buildings, and here in Australia, we're just too young a country to have anything with that kind of history to it. And so when I knew that I was going to be writing this story, went down a bit of a rabbit hole, you know, in looking up images of old manors and places like that through the UK, because absolutely rifled with them. There's gorgeous estates and manor houses and stuff through the UK, and it sort of just became an amalgamation of a few that I just really liked and sort of drew on them for inspiration, but unfortunately didn't get to see any in person. Maybe one day I can go over, but it was all just online research.
Brilliant. No, I think it was quite powerful. I've gone through, we over in England, we have this trust called the National Trust, where you can see historical buildings and parks and things, and it's really, really informative and educational and really cool, and I think you'd love it.
For sure.
And I've been through quite a few, and in those old Victorian houses, or in the Tudor houses, manors, there are things.
I'm a massive Tudor nerd, so anything Tudor, I'm like all over it.
There are things like monks' holes where people would stash themselves away to keep themselves safe from, was it the Catholic Church, I think, at one point was hunting everybody down? I can't remember.
I think everyone at some point hunted one side or the other doing the hunting.
So then these people of these religious beliefs who were being hunted by other people of religious beliefs, they hid in these holes. And I thought that's quite interesting that this building, the manor, has got these monks' holes almost everywhere, and a house that old could have little nooks and crannies. And I'm so glad, in a way, because I'm so glad that you didn't liken it to an American Victorian house, because they're completely different.
Absolutely.
You know, as are made very differently, and they have different characteristics, whereas the American ones have lots of they pretty much have insulated walls that are open cavities, whereas we don't. We just have brick. It's just solid brick.
That did make it quite a challenge when I was sort of, you know, designing the tunnel and sort of how it would come about, because of the fact I'm like, okay, well, it's stone.
Yeah. So
how are you going to explain this? Like, otherwise there's this big gaping hole in the walls if they're not going to notice that from the outside. Like, so I kind of had to sort of play around with it to make it believable that there was this sort of tunnel. And so I always loved the idea of having secret tunnels in a really old home, and the fact that her father was the architect of it. Her ancestor was the architect of it. To me, kind of helped make sense as to how that was possible, that it could be like that. So yeah, otherwise I was just worried that it would just seem like I've just randomly thrown a hole in the back of a cupboard, and just like it wouldn't be very believable. Like, you kind of had to really lay that foundation so that, you know, when she discovered it, you're not going, oh, rubbish, as if that would really be there. Like, you kind of already had to set it in place. People go, oh, of course there's a tunnel behind there.
Yeah.
Why didn't we see that coming?
Yeah. No,
Spoiler alert.
I thought it was quite interesting. I used to work as a nanny years ago in a house for a family, and the house was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and there were secret, not passages, but secret cupboards that were masked by the mahogany panelings.
Oh, the panels, yeah.
Yeah, and you wouldn't know they were there unless you pushed them or you slid them in a certain way, And I had to be shown them all because they're all cleaning cupboards, which was my job at the time. But I was just like, this is very cool. This is a hideaway. This is really interesting. But so yeah, it was very believable.
Oh, good.
Brilliant. It was fantastic. My next question, which character did you enjoy writing the most?
Good question. I'd have, without giving anything away, I'd have to say Mina.
Okay.
Just because she doesn't really have a lot of verbal interaction in the story, so she was quite challenging to write in that you really had to convey who she was and what drove her without her really saying anything. And yeah, she's a very complex character, but I can't really say anything. I don't want to give anything away, but I think she was a challenge. Definitely my favorite to write.
I found her very interesting. Very sad sort of character as well. Quite lost in her life and whatever happened after. But yeah, it was quite sad, and it seemed like the manor was thrown because of what happened, thrown into this eternal cycle of history just repeating itself. Maybe I don't know. That's what I got anyway from the end.
And I guess that's why I had to set it in the place that I set it, in the type of building that I set it in, because I very much wanted that feel of that ancestry and that really embedded history, and having a place that's old enough that it retains its own memories of what's happened in those walls, and just to really give that creepy vibe. I think if I had set it in, like you said, an American Victorian building, or even here in Australia, that you just don't have that depth of history, and I think you really needed that to be able to get that perspective of why she felt so connected to it, because she had so many generations of family through there that she didn't even know about up until very recently. So it all kind of had to fall into place for the story to work, and a lot of that came from that whole ancestral connection.
While reading the book, I felt like I was, because I think it was last year that it came out in Halloween, Blythe Hill, The Haunting of Blythe Hill. Bly Manor. Why did I say Blythe? Anyway, and I kind of had that image of that manor in my head as the manor. I don't know why, it just seemed to stick. Not Hill House or anything like that, but Bly Manor. I think it might have been because it was set in England, and it seemed to have a separate section that could be the uncle's quarters, which were far away from the rest of the house. That's the kind of visual image that I had personally. And it was a house full of mystery and
secrets.
Yeah, definitely. I really like the idea of it all. It was very, very good. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
Sorry, I'm losing my voice now. In regards, I just had this particular question because I like to think about fan fiction and things like that. Would you consider writing a backstory for Camille's school friends, like what happened after the book, as like an anthology or a continuation?
Potentially. It's actually been interesting. Like, I wrote LeRoux Manor as a standalone, but I've had a number of people asking me when the sequel's going to come out, and whether I would do like a prequel of like Woodville itself and the people within it. So it's not something I wouldn't do. I'm not sure. I'd have to put a lot of thought into sort of how that would work. But I do think that Woodville has a potential to have a backstory or a side story. But you'd have to have LeRoux Manor in it, because that's kind of the centerpiece of the whole town. So I'd have to have a play with it. But I love that people are interested enough that they want to see more of it. So
definitely.
That's cool.
Because I feel like Lachlan would have gone through a lot of trauma, and gone through a lot of internal what's the word, internal turmoil after what happened. And I feel it would be great to kind of catch up on him. I do feel like there was something more with him that could be used later on. And I
especially
kind of,
when you know that his uncle had been missing for so long. So
yeah,
I mean, it's not a big town, and in a
yeah,
place like that, something happens and everyone feels it. So I always felt writing him that he kind of had this shadow over him all the time, of that, you know, people would look at him and see his uncle, and it was just he was like haunted by this unknown truth
yeah,
of his own sort of family heritage and what had happened. So he would definitely be a very interesting one to kind of do a bit of a backstory on it and his family. But unfortunately, in LeRoux Manor, there's just so much going on that the sort of side characters just didn't get as much voice as potentially they would have liked.
No, I think it did work quite well. But you know, there's always a possibility to do some more on the rest of it, and that's always fun. Leaving it open a little bit, I think, was a good idea. If you ever, I mean, it's your choice, because you know, but I think it would be an awesome book if you did another one.
Oh, thank you.
No, because it really, it did sit with me for a while, and I was just like, you know, it made me think at the end. I was like, that's an interesting ending. Yeah.
That's what I like to hear.
You have been part of a lot of anthologies. How did you get involved in those anthologies?
Really just word of mouth. So when I sort of started looking at writing as a serious venture, I branched out on Facebook and joined a couple of writing groups and things like that, and just making connections with other authors. And one author I became good friends with had received an open call for an anthology and shoved it my way and said, hey, you should give this a go, because at this point I had already started my first novel, but it was slow going, and I was suffering from all the, you know, imposter syndrome stuff, and it was really dragging. And so I thought a short story would be a good way to kind of get the creative juices flowing again, and just kind of build up a bit of a portfolio and some confidence. And so I submitted my first short story for that anthology, which was Lurking in the Deep, and it was accepted, which was just super exciting. And then, yeah, I think I submitted maybe about 12 to 15 short stories published in anthologies all up, before I released my collection of short stories in 2018. So it was a really good writing exercise. I mean, it's good for building up your confidence, especially when they do get accepted. But it's also a really good way to train yourself to write concisely and be able to tell, you know, a really great story without waffling, essentially, because the thing about anthologies is if you've got a set word limit. So I found that really great training for then when I went on to novels. So highly recommend to anyone just to get a couple under your belt. It's a lot of fun. Plus you meet other authors in the anthologies and stuff as well, so you get to network and expand your horizons a little bit there.
Yeah, I would imagine that you would learn quite a lot through other authors and their experiences. Maybe
Absolutely.
did you make friends with any and still in contact? That's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I made so many friends through the anthologies that I'm still in touch with now, and check in with regularly, and we all follow each other on social media, so we all congratulate each other with releases and support each other. So yeah, I definitely recommend doing to anyone. Yeah,
that's amazing, because I know from what I've heard on the grapevine, a lot of authors can be quite I'd say, I don't know how much of this is true, this is just what other people have told me via social media, this is the problem, but they found that some authors may want to just push their own books rather than support each other. But what I found on Bookstagram and Book Twitter is that everyone's actually really supportive. I found the complete opposite, that yeah, you might get an author messaging you saying, can you help me promote this or this, and then ultimately you do have a good connection of friends as well as, you know, network colleagues, and that's really important. I love Bookstagram
absolutely.
and Book Twitter. I think it's great.
Yeah.
The online
I
book
think especially
communities.
with indie, like self-publishing as well, I think it's imperative to have those connections. And you do sometimes encounter an author here or there that doesn't want to borrow other authors or is kind of a bit more self-involved, but it's so far in between. The writing community online is amazing, because I guess the way it is today, like so many authors would love to be traditionally published but don't get that. It doesn't mean that their work's not any good, but self-publishing is giving people a platform to get their amazing work out there. But it's a lot more work involved when it comes to marketing and getting your work read by people. So everybody that self-publishes understands that. So I think that's where the sense of community comes from, because everybody appreciates that how much work goes behind it, and by connecting with other authors and helping them support their work, inevitably when it comes time for your next book to come out, they're more than happy to help you out as well. So I find that if there wasn't the self-publishing aspect, it probably wouldn't be the tight-knit community that I've found it to be. But I love it. I think, and across all platforms too. I mean, I was even surprised. I'm only sort of a newbie to the TikTok thing, but I was amazed at the author community on there. It's insane. It's probably the best by far, I think, that I've encountered so far. But everyone's just so supportive, and it's, I don't know, it just makes being a writer even better.
That's amazing. That is absolutely brilliant. Because you do need a community to be able to research and write and to get feedback as well. You know, a lot of authors can bring a lot to the table when they all work together, I feel. So my next question was, would you consider doing a horror series, or do you prefer standalones?
Up until now, I've done standalones. So my next book that's coming out is a standalone, but I am starting a series. So that's going to be a new challenge for me, because I haven't written a series before, but I just found the idea too big for a standalone. So it's going to be a horror / paranormal series, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Oh, exciting. Well, we'll definitely keep an eye out for that. That sounds awesome.
Yes.
I was looking on your website the other day, and it shows that you're incredibly busy. How do you manage your time?
Not very well some days, to be honest. It's a work in progress. But yeah, basically I've got my diary and everything's written down in there, and I have to stick to it as best I can. And I work long hours, long days, and sacrifice a lot, as do my family. But you have to. If it's what you love doing, it doesn't feel like work. And the fact that I love it is what keeps me motivated. So, I mean, it does get overwhelming sometimes, and you feel, life happens and you kind of end up falling a bit behind because you haven't been able to work because of something that's happened with the family or whatnot, and that can be stressful. But I've got an amazingly supportive partner who's very good at kind of just making me stop and breathe when I'm freaking out.
I was
going to break it down.
I was just gonna say, essentially, you're your own boss, being a self-published author as well. So I guess you can set your own limitations and boundaries, and that would make the job easier, rather than having to write a story in a deadline for a publishing house. It's quite interesting, the dynamics of it, because until I started Bookstagram, I didn't know that indie authors were a thing. I just thought, there was Wattpad where those were the indie authors. That was my understanding of it, because obviously if you don't know, you don't know. And this last year has been an absolute roller coaster to be able to learn that, and meet authors like yourself, who have written some amazing work. So yeah, it's been awesome. My final question, do you have any tips or inspiration for budding authors, writers, creators?
Just try and make as many connections as you can, and just get out there and do it. I mean, it's easier said than done. I'll first one to admit that, but the only way you're going to reach your goals is to actually put pen to paper and just write it, and just don't have expectations that the first thing that you're going to write is going to be, you know, a Pulitzer Prize winning piece of fiction, or you know, like, just you've got to just understand that your writing career is like anything, you're going to get better the more you do it. So it doesn't matter if you spend a whole day writing something that you think is a piece of rubbish, you still spent the day writing, and then you can improve on it the next day. You just got to stick at it, and the more connections you can make within the writing community, the better, because they're the people that you can turn to when you're frustrated, because they understand, and if you've got questions, they can answer it and they can point you in the right direction. And because writing can be quite a lonely career choice, and you can get a little cabin feverish, especially when you're sort of not having a great time of it. So yeah, definitely just reach out to everyone and just write, and do it because you love it, not because, you know, for any other reason, just because you enjoy it, because that's the only thing that's going to get you through when it's not so fun.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. Thank you for that. Because it's not always plain sailing. It's not always easy. You're going to come up against obstacles, you know, and I'm sure lots of Amazon independent authors have done the same, or whether it's Amazon or whether it's their own publishing house or whatever. And I think, you know, for those who are even struggling getting pen to paper or fingertips to keyboard, I think that will really help. So thank you very much for that. That was great.
My pleasure.
Brilliant. Well, that's it, people. That's the last question. If anybody has any questions for Liz, please do message her on her social media, which is, Liz, because I can't remember all of them.
So you got my website, which is www.lizbutcher.com.au, or you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok under @LunaLoveLiz.
Luna Love Liz. I've got to remember that. I've added you on there anyway, so brilliant. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please contact Liz, and I'm sure she'll message you back as soon as she can. And check out all her work. It's on Amazon, isn't it? Your books are on Amazon. Brilliant.
And on the website as well.
Yeah. So check out the blog, and you can find the title LeRoux Manor by Liz Butcher. And we'll see you in the future, people. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a lovely day. Thank you.
You too. Bye.